Let's take a look at what is tendering, right? So it's a very important process in contract management and administration. The first and foremost process is tendering, which is the formal and legal process to offer bid or for getting the contract from a public or private sector organization. Generally, tendering is given for large and complex projects. It's not for simple projects because simple projects you can talk to the vendor or talk to the contractor directly. Whereas for the complex projects, it needs a lot of specifications, right? So in order to have a clear understanding of the overall scope of work and also to get skilled workers or laborers pertaining to it, we generally propose tendering, right? And tendering is a first stage. It is an invitation process, and more or less, it's an legal process. So it's between a party or a client and another party, which is contractor or construction company or even small scale, construction agency and so on, right? So this is between the two parties, and there are different ways the tendering is done. I could take a look at different types of tendering. The first being the open tendering. These are different types of tendering. First is the open tendering. Open tendering is a process in which the tender documents or the invitation to the bid is given to almost everybody. So it is just kind of an open tender. Anybody can bid for the particular contract, right? So, for example, construction, sewer lines, public building, right? Say this is something an example, right? So it can be given to, it can be distributed to all the people via a newspaper ad, government office, and other medium of advertising. This is typically an example for open tender, right? So we want to construct the sewer line in a public building, right? So it's generally the tender or the bidding for this is kind of pretty open. What? So it is generally distributed to all people via newspaper, ad, government office, and notice board, and other medium of advertisements. Say, for example, TV ad and newspaper, not newspaper ad, but the magazines and so on, right? So this is open ended. Right. So what we generally get is like we get uh, tender documents from all the sources. So it might be a large source because it's open to all. And on a particular day of evaluation, all these tenders are evaluated, or it gets evaluated it as the office receives. As the office receives, and the best quotations or bid will get the contract, will get the contract. So this is typically the open tender, right? So if you have the habit of reading newspaper and you find this tender invitation in almost all the newspapers, like be it a regional newspaper or it be a national newspaper, all newspaper have a column or something related to the invitation to bid, right? So this is typically the open tender, right? And open tendering is just like kind of a pretty much related to an auction, in a sense that it is something predominantly followed to have a very large participation. Right. But this next thing is called sealed or closed tendering. And even this example can be given. Say the same sewer line in a public building. But this is pretty much like an auction when which people can quote and something like that, right? Whereas even though we get it from all the source on a particular day of evaluation, it gets evaluated very much is with the presence of you know um, qualified bidders. This is very important, with the presence of qualified bidders, and we will be evaluating that, right? So that's pretty much the sealed or closed tender. So this is a very important thing. That's the difference between open tendering and sealed or closed tendering. And in the advertisement, it is mentioned like sealed or closed tender. And very importantly, I think we have missed here, that is, we will be requiring to send those documents within deadline. Right. So it's a deadline. There's a deadline, stipulated deadline, and it's not open all time. So we'll be looking into the receiving the tender documents within the deadline. That's very important. Right. So that's the open tendering and closed tendering. Right. And even this is have a deadline, and this is have a deadline. And the next is very important thing is called selective or restricted tendering. Very important. So one of the disadvantage or disadvantages of these tendering process, all you can see it, you get it from the large source, be it open tender or closed tender, you get it from a large source. The evaluation process might take a little longer, or sometimes some people who just like that quoted or send their bid documents, but then those things may not be pretty much useful for the final outcome, right? So in order to restrict that, say for example, selective or restricted tendering, construction of metro tunnels, right? So tunnel for metro projects, right? So in that case, we cannot go for open tendering or even closed tendering. The reason is that construction of tunnels is a specialized process. Not all companies, all construction companies can able to do this particular work, right? So this is something pretty much a different process altogether, right? And it's also a specialized process, can be done only by specialized agency or a company who have a competency to do this particular work prior, maybe they would have done a previous job of such nation, right? So in that case, it is only given to selective or restricted numbers. Like for example, L&T, uh, L&T ECC, Gammon India, Triple CL. So these are the companies. Say for example, in my mind, I'm confident that when we request them or when we offer them the contract, they could able to do it. Right? So, but then there are quite a finite number of companies who are specialists in that. Then we don't give that the invitation for tendering or invitation for bid to all the construction companies, but we will give to only specific companies. Very important term is called to have the competencies or ability, even put in a very menial term, ability to under or to perform this specialized work, something like that, right? So this is typically the selective or restricted tendering. So this is very important. And serial tendering and term tendering is different types of tender altogether, but it cannot be generally taken as uh, different type, but it can be under closed or open tender. But what does the serial tender and term tender means is that the work packages or work breakdown structure and bill of quantities are the key features in the evaluation of the tender. So it's not about various things like restriction their capacity or something, but whatever the quoted thing based on which it gets evaluated, right? So based on the work breakdown structure or work packages and the bill of quantities, and very important thing is called schedule of payments, right? So based on this particular thing and this particular tendering process happens, and then the contract is awarded to the qualified company, as well as the bill of quantities and the schedule of payments, right? So it cannot be all the three, but any two or even any one of these criterion will be the decision factor for the serial tender or the term tender. Then the very important thing is called special tender. Example, generally it happens during some acts of God or natural calamity, or especially during war, or even now pandemic. So when the situations were not planned or it was just uncertain, this particular tenders are done. Like for example, rehabilitation center for affected people. So in that case, government can go for special tenders, and they need not wait for the processes like the open tender or closed tender or even selective tender. So the government has the ability to procure special items in a quicker time, right? So creating a center for the tsunami affected people is that very important at that moment, right? So we cannot delay further. So in that case, government can go for a special procedure or procurement or process to get things done for those people, right? So that's in that case they can go for special tenders, right? So nobody's can nobody can oppose that because it's kind of a very important for the people at that moment. So instead of wasting time in getting tender documents and evaluating it, like they go as such, like even they can go for that day itself, whoever comes in, so they can give the tender based on the suitability of the people, I mean the contractors or the tenderers, and then they give the project to them so that no time gets wasted, and then it gets done within a shorter period of time. So that's kind of a special tender that we can do, right? So that is kind of special. And another time during war, in war time, for example, procurement of armory elements and missiles and something like that, they cannot negotiate and waste time. Instead, they can get things done with even if the price is very high, it's a necessary that time, right? Then they go for special tender and they get it from the agency, legal agency that sells, equipments and something like that, right? So that case, it's called special tenders. And during flood, right? So block, channels or water transport or sewer lines or even stormwater tunnels. In that case, it has to be removed. The blockages has to be removed. So in that case, they just invite bid to specialized agency to perform immediately. The task has to be performed immediately. Hence, that kind of a tenders are called special tenders, right? Somewhere within the available source, they try to find out the best, and then they do this something. Then, even though there are specialist agency, but they took a little longer, but they eliminate that. So it is just like first come first serve kind of an option. So in which the first priority is given to people who have good qualification as well as they code within that particular period or emergency time, right? And sometimes the flood release, government generally take help from the disaster management agencies. It is like kind of a special tender, so ordering the rescue operation by the disaster management agencies or relief agencies or something like that, right? In that case, it's kind of a special tenders, and sometimes distribution of food items for the people who surrounded by water and natural calamity. In that case, government can request the food caterer industry, and then they do it very good. Whoever has a competency to make a huge quantity of food items, and it can be distributed by army or air force or something. Right? So something like those things can be called as a special tenders. Then a very important thing is called negotiated, something pretty much common in construction field. It is not a very big process. It is just like the conventional a way of finding out the contractors or labor to execute a certain small quantum of work, not a bigger complex project, but small quantum of work. So, for example, construction of a boundary wall may not require us very skilled laborers like an engineers or architect, but instead they can find out people who do in a local region, and then they can negotiate with them for the rate and also for the time and for the other process, other elements required for construction of the particular compound wall. Right. So in that case, it is called negotiated tender. So it is not a very kind of a process, but instead it is just negotiation, like talking to the local persons who have the competency to do the particular task, and then requesting for the lesser rate, or the materials will be bought by the customers, or it can be borne by the contractor and other related stuffs, or it could be a piece-wise contract, or it could be a unit rate contract, or it could be a lump sum contract. All those things can be decided by negotiation. Right. So that's right. So next is very much the competitive dialogue procedure. It is something pretty much related to negotiate tendering, but it has a different meaning. In the negotiated tendering, we'll just take a look at the local people whom we have a trust, or somebody recommend them. So it's just kind of an pretty much a biased kind of thing. Uh, but in a competitive dialogue procedure, it's just like an open tender, but then like anybody can approach the agency and then prove their skill and competency to get the tender. So that's the difference between the negotiated tender and competitive dialogue procedure. I repeat, in negotiated tender, we just generally take a look at people who have competencies, whom we know or we are comfortable with, or our friends or subordinates who recommend or something like that, right? In a competitive dialogue process, just like an open, It is like an open negotiated tender. So anybody, so we just advertise that. So this is the work has to be done, and for that I'm looking for specialized agency or people, and you advertise that. And then people who have the competency, they can send the they don't have to send the documents like in the open tender, but then they can approach the company, and then they get appointment, and then they prove their skills, and finally they recruit them, right? So they give contract to them based on their skills and competencies, right? So that's kind of a competitive dialogue procedure, but even it's negotiated. Like, we don't give a search whatever they say. We just say, if a person says I require 500 rupees a day, the labor requires 500 rupees a day, you can negotiate for 450, 425, without compromising the quality of construction. Those things, negotiation can happen. And then that is what we call competitive dialogue procedure. So these are the general types of tendering, and out of which open tendering, seal tendering, and selective tendering is predominantly followed in major construction projects. Right, Samir? Right. Let me. So the next we'll talk about procedure or something like. We can talk about procedure for contract or contract awarding, right? So the first step, let me. The first and foremost important step is the invitation. Invitation to bid, and that is we call tender invitation. So we invite people, it be the open or closed. So that will be the mention open or in special, tenders, tendering. We may not generally give invitation to bid, but we government selects or the agency selects, by their own or something without wasting time, right? So this is invitation to bid, and in that there's something called bid time, or you can even call deadline, right? So deadline, it's a very important thing. The next is the specifications. So specification involves drawings. If it is a construction project, it includes drawings, description of work, something called work packages that involves materials can be used, process or procedure be followed, something like that. Materials to be used, right? So that comes in a specification of material, what type of material and what type of process or procedure, or even I can call that to be technique or methodology, whatever might be the name. Follow all those things or description of work or work packages. Then very important thing is the schedule of work, which is basically the scheduling, the time frame. All those things will be there in the bid or the tender invitation. Hence these things. So this is a very important thing, right? This is a very important thing, and you have to really follow this. And the most important thing is the cost, right? So that's a final, you know, validatory element, right? So costs, the generally the price. So this is a very important. So this is the invitation. Their invitation contains these things. Right? So one is the deadline. It's very important. Say I want it in 30 days time, or generally it'll be 3 months time, or 90 days, something like that. And then all those things which requires strict evaluation and costing. So we'll come back to this little later because costing is a very important entity. there will be different things that be considered in costing or pricing. And once that is done, and it will be sent within the deadline, let's say 90 days, and then pre-qualification, very important thing, that will be done by the client, or stakeholders, or the one who gives the invitation to bid to the people, right? So pre-qualification of the bidders, like not all bidders, their documents are evaluated. First, they'll check the pre-qualification of the bidders. Like one is the competencies or capacity of the uh, contractor or the bidder. Generally, we call bidder. First, we'll check whether the bidder has the capability to do that. Say, for example, a small scale construction company, when they quote for a metro project, and we need to really look into their competencies, whether they have done that previously or something like that. What happens if we don't check that and we award the contract, and if they can't able to do it in a real time, then it's a waste of time and money and effort. So they have to again go to square one to invite people, and then the bidding process happens. It's kind of a very waste. That's one important. And next is the qualification of the bidder. So in competencies, it's we really check whether they have proficiency to do that. But in a qualification of the bidder, we look into the past record. Whether they have done within the stipulated time, or in a good sense, it is something like history of work, right? So whatever they have done, and we also need to check whether they are in blacklisted contractor or something like that, or insolvent bidders, or which means they become insolvent, which means bankrupt in the previous case, and then they just quote for this. So in that case, you should be very careful to look into those things also. If you award them, then it will be a detrimental to the final outcome of your project, right? So in that case, insolvent bidders, all these things to be checked. So something like that. And then we need to look into insolvent, and even you can take court cases. If they have court cases, then it'll be difficult for them to concentrate this project. So in that case, all this records, probably court cases or records, has to be checked, right? This will be done by the agency or the client themselves, right? So they hire even agency, and then finally. So that's a pre-qualification of the bidder. And once you evaluate them and you shortlist them, bidders. And this is applicable for even open and seal tendering. So we'll shortlist the bidders. And then for a closed tender, there will be before the closed tender, and the shortlisted people will be notified. Like so and so date, you have to appear for bidding or something, right? So in this, there is something like different things are there. Like for example, um, there is difficulty of a company, or difficulty for a bidder to appear. In that case, they can send a representative. So one difficulty is can be preoccupied work of the contractor, maybe a busy contractor, so he might have to be in other country or something like that. So we can put it absenteeism, or absenteeism, ab- or even you can, or you can even call a death of that particular person, the founder of a company or something like that. So in that case, a representative those person can help you, right? So generally, this is one of the important thing that you should do. Then, if no, uh, represent, or if they are not interested or something, if they have sent the bidding thing, but final moment they withdraw from participation, they have to pay some fee uh, to withdraw, and then that will be resulted in you know black marking, right? So if too many bids a company does, and they withdraw all or they don't participate, for withdrawal, it's something called specific fees will be there, and they'll ask for a reason. And if they do it for for more projects, then it'll be black marking them, because they are not very keen in taking a project. So they just like that, invite, send their document, and finally, generally it is not done. Black mark, they'll be send a warning uh, for being more serious and something like that. Right. And then bidding day, all people join together, and then they will evaluate the document. Evaluation of tender documents. Um, right. So in the evaluation of tender document, the the evaluator looks into the submitted documents. Normally, people believe that the people who quote less will get the contract. It is not so. So there is something called specifications or quality specifications, and whoever does that with the nominal cost gets the specification. Whoever does that with the nominal cost or the nominal pricing will be avoided. So good quality specifications and nominal costs are generally avoided. And sometimes some company have got very, or can even call exemplary specification, but quoted little higher. Right? In that case, the evaluator can ask for revised, tender document. So they'll be given a time. So this is an exemption case where sometimes they had a very good quality stuff and they say that they will do within the stipulated time. But if it is something like an 1 lakh extra or 50,000 extra, in that case, the evaluator can ask for the revised tender document, so that if the bidder wishes to revise the document to provide with the stipulated amount, then he can submit the revised document, or he can refute or not wanted to revise it, and then he wants to stick with that price, then they'll look into the other aspects, like whether given to him or the company, they are good, but they cannot afford to change the price or something like that, then it can be done. That's why it is a good specification or exemplary specification, and nominal price generally gets. And if there's a tie between two company, when they quote for the same price, then they can go for the company which has got a good specification. Even if both the specifications are the same, it not be the same, but if the specification are the same, then they can go for negotiation between the two companies, right? So whichever, then it will become under negotiated, tendering documents or something. Right. And finally, once they evaluate the tender, then they go for contract procedures. So they will award the contract and something related to the tender documents gets closed at that point of time. Right. So in the next lecture, we'll be looking into the contract procedures in detail, and we also look into the contract violations and the alternate dispute mechanism called conciliation and arbitration will be discussed in next lecture. Right. So this comes to end of today's lecture.